I stared at the folded napkin the nurse had pressed into my hand as she checked my vitals. She'd done it so casually, like she was just adjusting my IV line, but her eyes had been different. Urgent. When I opened it in the bathroom 10 minutes later, 3 words were scrawled in blue ink. Test the coffee. That was 6 hours ago. Now I'm sitting in my truck in the hospital parking lot, trying to make sense of what I've just learned. My hands are still shaking. Let me back up. My name is Malcolm Sterling. I'm 64 years old, retired from 40 years as a civil engineer for the province. I live alone in a modest bungalow in North Vancouver, the same house my late wife Catherine and I bought in 1987. She passed 3 years ago from breast cancer. Since then, it's just been me rattling around in those 3 bedrooms, trying to figure out what retired life is supposed to look like. My son, Brendan, is 38. He's always been what Catherine called ambitious. Started his own property development company when he was 29. Married a woman named Sienna, who comes from money, had twin boys who are now 7. They live in West Vancouver in one of those glass boxes that hangs off the mountainside, the kind of place that costs $3 million and still needs another $1 million in renovations. I've always been proud of him. Proud of how hard he worked, how he pulled himself up. I helped where I could, small loans here and there when he was starting out, all paid back. Well, most of them paid back. Things changed about 8 months ago. It started small. Brendan began visiting more often, which I appreciated at first. After Catherine died, I'd been lonely. The boys would come with him sometimes, and we'd throw a football around in the backyard, and for a few hours the house would feel alive again. But the visits had a pattern. He'd always stay for coffee. Always ask me to make a fresh pot, said mine was better than what Sienna made. I took it as a compliment. Then about 3 months ago, I started feeling off. Nothing dramatic at first, just tired, unusually tired. I'd sleep 10 hours and wake up feeling like I'd been drugged. My hands would shake when I held my morning newspaper. I chalked it up to age, maybe early Parkinson's. My father had it. My family doctor, Dr. Okonkwo, ran tests. Blood work came back, showing elevated liver enzymes. She seemed concerned, but not alarmed. "Let's monitor it," she said. "Could be your medications interacting. Are you taking anything new?" I wasn't. 2 weeks ago, I collapsed in my kitchen. Just went down like someone had cut my strings. I came to on the linoleum, my head throbbing where it had hit the corner of the counter. I managed to call 911. At the hospital, they ran more tests. Dr. Okonkwo visited me personally, which was unusual. She sat on the edge of my bed, her face serious. "Malcolm, your liver function is deteriorating rapidly. We're seeing levels consistent with toxic exposure. Have you been working with any chemicals? Paint thinners? Solvents?" "I'm retired," I reminded her. "I putter in the garden. That's it. What about supplements? Herbal remedies?" I shook my head. "Just my blood pressure medication and a multivitamin." She ordered more tests. They kept me overnight for observation. Brendan visited that evening, brought the twins. He seemed genuinely worried, which made me feel guilty for being a burden. "Dad, you're scaring me," he said. "We can't lose you too." He made me coffee in the hospital cafeteria. I remember thinking how thoughtful that was, how he knew I hated the swill from the nurse's station. We sat in the little seating area by the windows, and he talked about the boys' hockey season while I sipped the coffee. It was good coffee. Tim Hortons, my favorite. I started feeling worse about an hour after he left. Nauseous, dizzy. The night nurse found me vomiting in the bathroom. They moved me to a monitored bed. That's when Nurse Patterson slipped me the napkin. I didn't know what to make of it at first. Test the coffee? What coffee? Then I remembered Brendan's coffee. But that was insane. Why would she tell me to test coffee my own son had brought me? I was discharged the next morning with instructions to avoid alcohol and follow up in a week. Dr. Okonkwo still didn't have answers, but she scheduled me for a liver biopsy. When I got home, I found Brendan's SUV in my driveway. He'd let himself in with his key. He was in my kitchen, and I could smell fresh coffee brewing. "Dad, you should have called. I would have picked you up." He pulled me into a hug. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," I admitted, confused. "Come on, sit down." I made coffee. I looked at the coffee maker, at the fresh pot he'd just brewed. "Test the coffee." "Actually, I'm going to lie down for a bit," I said. "Rain check?" Something flickered across his face. Disappointment? Annoyance? It was gone too fast to tell. Sure, Dad. Sure. I'll just clean this up and head out. Call me later? After he left, I stood in my kitchen for a long time, staring at that pot of coffee. Finally, I poured it into a glass jar, sealed it tight, and hid it in the back of my garage behind some old paint cans. I felt ridiculous, paranoid. What was I thinking? That my own son was poisoning me. But Nurse Patterson's eyes kept haunting me, the urgency in them. I spent the next 2 days doing something I never thought I'd do. I started investigating my own son. I went through my medicine cabinet first. All my prescriptions were there, bottles about half full. Nothing seemed off. Then I checked the kitchen. My regular coffee, the President's Choice medium roast I've been buying for 15 years. Container looked normal. But then I found something. In the back of my cupboard, behind the everyday mugs, there was a canister I didn't recognize. Expensive-looking thing, stainless steel, no label. I opened it, coffee inside, but darker than what I usually bought. I smelled it. Something was off. Not the coffee smell exactly, but something underneath it. Chemical. Faint, but there. I sealed it back up and put it in the garage with the other sample. That's when I remembered the security camera. After Catherine died, Brendan had insisted I install a Ring doorbell and a couple of cameras around the house. For your safety, Dad, he'd said. One pointed at the driveway, one at the backyard. But there was also one in the kitchen. Brendan had installed it himself, said it was so I could check if I'd left the stove on when I was out. I'd never actually looked at the footage, barely knew how to access it. It took me 3 hours and a call to tech support, but I finally figured out how to pull up the recordings on my laptop. I started with the day I collapsed in the kitchen. The timestamp showed 9:47 a.m. I watched myself moving around the kitchen, making breakfast. Normal routine. Then, at 10:15, I left the frame, heading to the garage to get some gardening tools. At 10:23, while I was still in the garage, someone else entered the kitchen. Brendan. I felt cold watching it. He moved quickly, efficiently, went straight to the coffee container, the regular one, my President's Choice. He pulled out a small vial from his jacket pocket. Even in the grainy footage, I could see him measuring something out, mixing it into the coffee, stirring it thoroughly. With a spoon he then washed and dried. The whole thing took 90 seconds. I watched him leave. Watched myself come back in 5 minutes later, oblivious. Watched myself make a pot of coffee at 11:30. I collapsed at 11:55. I sat back in my chair, my heart hammering. The timestamp showed this was 3 weeks ago. I scrolled back further. Found another incident 2 weeks before that. Same thing. Brendan entering when I was in the shower, doctoring the coffee. I went back months. Found it happening again and again. Always when I was briefly out of the room. Always the coffee. My own son had been slowly poisoning me for at least 6 months. I need to stop here and tell you about something Catherine said to me, about 2 months before she died. She was on a lot of pain medication by then, in and out of lucidity. But she grabbed my hand one evening and said, "Malcolm, promise me you'll be careful with Brendan." "What do you mean?" I'd asked. "He's in trouble. Money trouble. Bad trouble. He came to me last month, asked me to change my will, wanted to make sure his inheritance was protected from his creditors." "Catherine, you don't have a will. Everything is in my name." She'd looked confused then, and I'd assumed it was the morphine talking. She died 3 days later, and I never thought about it again. Until now. I started digging into Brendan's business. It wasn't hard. Property development deals are public record in BC. What I found made me sick. His company, Sterling Development Corp., was hemorrhaging money. 3 major projects had fallen through in the last 18 months. He'd borrowed heavily, over-leveraged himself. There were liens against his properties, a lawsuit from investors. He was, conservatively, $4 million in debt, and I was his only significant creditor. Not in business loans, those were all paid back, but in something else, Catherine's life insurance. When she died, the policy paid out $750,000. It went to me as the beneficiary, but Catherine had always talked about splitting it with Brendan eventually, helping him with his business. After she died, I'd told him the same thing. "When you really need it, son, it's there." But if I died, my will left everything to Brendan. The house, worth about $1.2 million in today's market. My savings, another $400,000. My pension, which had a survivor benefit clause that would pay out $300,000. All told, about $2 million. Enough to save his company, enough to save his marriage, his lifestyle, everything. I sat with this knowledge for a full day before I did anything. Part of me still didn't want to believe it. This was Brendan, my son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, to throw a curveball. The young man I'd walked down from the mountains when he'd broken his ankle on a camping trip, carrying him on my back for 6 kilometers. But the cameras didn't lie. I called Nurse Patterson. It took some effort to find her. I had to call the hospital and get transferred 3 times, but eventually I got through. "Mr. Sterling," she said quietly, "did you test the coffee?" "How did you know?" I asked. "I've been a nurse for 22 years, she said. "I've seen this before, the symptoms, the pattern of illness. And I saw your son, the way he was so insistent about the coffee he'd brought you. Something felt wrong. What was in it? I can't say for certain without tests. But if I had to guess, probably antifreeze. Ethylene glycol. Small doses over time cause exactly the kind of liver damage you're showing. It's sweet, so it masks well in coffee. And it's easily available. Jesus Christ. Mr. Sterling, you need to go to the police. Not tomorrow, now. And you need to get those coffee samples tested at a real lab. I'm going to give you a name." She gave me the contact information for a toxicologist at the University of British Columbia. Then she said something that chilled me to the bone. "One more thing. Don't drink anything he gives you. Don't eat anything he prepares. And don't let him know you suspect anything. People who do this, when they realize they're caught, sometimes they accelerate. He might try to finish what he started." I thanked her and hung up. That night, Brendan called. "Hey, Dad. Just checking in. Want to grab breakfast tomorrow? There's that diner you like in Horseshoe Bay." My stomach turned. "Actually, I'm not feeling great. Doctor wants me to rest." "Oh, okay. Well, I could bring something by. Some soup maybe? Company?" No. I think I need to sleep. But thanks, son." A pause. "You sure you're okay, Dad? You sound off. Just tired." Another pause. Longer. "All right. Love you. Love you too." I hung up and stared at the phone. The next morning, I took the coffee samples to the toxicologist Nurse Patterson had recommended. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a quiet woman in her 50s who listened to my story without interruption. "This will take about 48 hours, she said. "But if you're right, we'll find it. Ethylene glycol shows up very clearly in testing. And then you go to the police, with evidence." I also went to my lawyer that afternoon, Gerald Morrison, who'd handled Catherine's estate. I told him everything. "Malcolm," he said slowly, "this is a police matter. But before you go to them, let's protect your assets. I'm going to draft an emergency codicil to your will. Everything goes into a trust that Brendan can't access even after your death. It'll take a few weeks to fully probate, but we can file the paperwork today. Won't that tip him off?" "Not if we're discreet." We filed the paperwork that afternoon. 48 hours later, Dr. Tanaka called. "Mr. Sterling, I'm sending you the full report, but I can tell you now. Both samples tested positive for ethylene glycol. The coffee from your cupboard has extremely high concentrations, approximately 200 milliliters per liter. The sample from the hospital is lower, but still significant. If you'd been drinking from that cupboard regularly, I would be dead. Within weeks, yes. Your liver would have failed completely." I sat down hard. Even expecting it, hearing it confirmed, was different. "I've already sent a copy of this report to the RCMP, she continued. "You should expect a call from them shortly. Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry. No one should have to go through this." The RCMP called within the hour. Detective Constable Jennifer Rousseau from the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team. She came to my house that evening with a partner, a younger man named Constable Park. I showed them everything. The camera footage, the test results, the financial records I'd pulled on Brendan's company. Detective Rousseau's face remained neutral throughout, but I could see the anger in her eyes. "Mr. Sterling, we're going to need to seize these coffee samples as evidence. We'll also need access to your security camera system. And I have to ask, does your son have a key to this house?" "Yes. Change your locks tonight. Do you have somewhere else you can stay for a few days while we build this case?" I shook my head. "This is my home. Then we'll have a patrol car outside. And Mr. Sterling, I cannot emphasize this enough. Do not confront your son. Do not tell him what you know. Let us handle this. But Brendan called that night. Dad, I'm worried about you. You've been dodging my calls. I'm coming over tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. No arguments. I looked at Detective Rousseau, who was still at my kitchen table. She nodded and mouthed, "Let him come." That night was the longest of my life. I kept thinking about all the times Brendan had visited over the past months, all the coffee we'd shared, how close I'd come. At 8:30 the next morning, Detective Rousseau and 3 other officers arrived. They sat up in my living room, recording equipment ready. Brendan showed up at exactly 9, let himself in with his key. He froze when he saw me sitting at the kitchen table with 4 police officers. "Dad? What's going on?" Detective Rousseau stood. "Brendan Sterling. I'm Detective Constable Rousseau with IHIT. We need to have a conversation with you about your father's illness." I watched the color drain from his face. What are you talking about? Specifically, we'd like to know about the substance you've been adding to his coffee over the past several months. The substance that's been causing his liver failure. For just a second, Brendan looked at me. Really looked at me. And I saw it there, clear as day. Not remorse, not shame. Calculation. He was figuring out if there was a way to talk his way out of this. "I want a lawyer," he said. They arrested him in my kitchen. Read him his rights while I sat there, watching my only child be handcuffed. He didn't look at me again as they let him out. The next weeks were a blur. The story made national news. Charges were laid. Attempted murder. Conspiracy to commit fraud. The RCMP searched his house and found receipts for antifreeze purchases that matched the timeline of my illnesses. They found internet searches on his computer about undetectable poisons and ethylene glycol symptoms. Sienna filed for divorce within 48 hours of his arrest. She claimed she had no knowledge of what he'd been doing, and I believe her. She looked genuinely shattered when I saw her at the courthouse. The twins are living with her parents now. I haven't seen them. I don't know if I will. Brendan's lawyer tried to make a deal, pleaded down to aggravated assault. But the Crown wasn't interested. Not with the camera footage. Not with the premeditation so clearly documented. The trial took 3 weeks. I had to testify. Had to sit in that witness box and describe watching the camera footage of my son poisoning me. Had to explain how I'd felt when I realized what was happening. Brendan's lawyer tried to paint me as a vindictive father, angry about his son's success. Tried to suggest I'd planted the evidence somehow. But the timeline was too clear, the medical records too damning. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge gave him 12 years. With parole eligibility after serving a third, he'll likely be out in 4. He'll be 42 years old. I'll be 68. I don't know what happens then. The thing is, I keep thinking about this, trying to figure out where I went wrong. Was it something Catherine and I did when he was young? Was it the pressure I put on him to succeed? The loans I gave him that maybe taught him to see me as a bank rather than a father? Or was it just money? Just debt and desperation and the terrible calculation that I was worth more dead than alive? I've been going to therapy. My therapist, Dr. Patel, says I need to stop trying to find a reason. Sometimes people make choices that can't be explained away by their childhood or their circumstances. Sometimes people just choose wrong. But he was my son. I think about that every day. Nurse Patterson visited me last month. Brought me cookies, which made me laugh. "These aren't poisoned, I promise," she said. We sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where it all happened, and she told me she'd seen 3 cases like mine in her career. Elderly parents being slowly poisoned by children who wanted their inheritance. "It's more common than you'd think," she said. "Financial elder abuse. It usually doesn't go this far, but the pattern is the same. Small thefts at first, forged signatures, power of attorney abuse. And sometimes, rarely, this." "Why did you suspect?" I asked. "Your son was too attentive in the wrong ways. He wasn't asking about your treatment or your prognosis. He was asking about your estate planning, about your will. And he pushed that coffee so hard, insisted you drink it. When you got sicker after he left, I checked the hospital log. Every visit from him corresponded with a spike in your symptoms 12 to 18 hours later. You saved my life." "You saved your life," she corrected. "You could have ignored that napkin. Most people would have. It sounds crazy, thinking your own child could hurt you. But that's the thing. It shouldn't sound crazy. It happens. More than we want to admit." I want to tell you something. Anyone reading this or hearing this story, if you're elderly or if you have elderly parents, please be aware. Financial elder abuse is one of the fastest growing crimes in Canada. Most of it doesn't end in poisoning, but it all starts the same way. Small boundary violations, unusual interest in your finances, pressure to change wills or sign over power of attorney. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. Don't be afraid to seem paranoid. Don't let family loyalty blind you to red flags. And if you're a healthcare worker and you suspect something, speak up. Nurse Patterson could have stayed silent, could have decided it wasn't her business, but she didn't, and I'm alive because of it. I also want to say this. If you're struggling financially, if you're drowning in debt, there are resources. There are ways out that don't involve hurting the people who love you. Talk to a financial counselor. File for bankruptcy if you need to. It's not shameful. It's survivable. What's not survivable is what Brendan chose. He didn't just lose his freedom. He lost his family, his children, his father. He lost himself. And for what? Money he'll never see. A debt that's going to follow him forever anyway. I still live in the same house. Changed the locks, like Detective Rousseau told me to. Took down the kitchen camera. I couldn't stand looking at it. I make my own coffee now. Buy it fresh, keep it locked in a cabinet. I know that sounds paranoid, but some fears, once learned, don't go away. The twins turned 8 last month. Sienna sent me a photo. 2 little boys in hockey jerseys, gap-toothed smiles. They look like Brendan did at that age. I sent them each a savings bond for their education. Set it up so they can access it when they turn 19. No parental involvement required. I don't know if I'll be around when they're old enough to understand what their father did. But if I am, I want them to know this. None of it was their fault. None of it was because of them. And their grandfather loved them. Loves them still, even if we never meet again. That's the hardest part, really. Not the betrayal itself, but what it took from me. I lost my son, yes, but I also lost my grandchildren. Lost the future I'd imagined. Sunday dinners, birthday parties, teaching the boys to fish like I taught Brendan. All of it. Gone. People ask me if I've forgiven him. I don't know how to answer that. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's not a decision you make once, and then it's done. Some days, I feel nothing but sadness. Sadness for the little boy he used to be, for the man he could have been. Other days I'm angry, furious at what he tried to do, at how close it came. And some days, I just miss my son. The version of him that existed before money and desperation twisted him into someone I don't recognize. I got a letter from him last month. First contact since the trial. The prison screened it first, made sure it wasn't threatening. It was 3 pages long. He didn't apologize. Not directly. Instead, he tried to explain. The debt, the pressure, Sienna threatening to leave, the investors threatening lawsuits. He wrote about lying awake at night, doing the math, realizing I was the only way out. I convinced myself you were already dying, he wrote. Mom had just died. You were so sad all the time. I told myself I was just speeding up the inevitable, that you'd want to help me if you knew how bad it was. The rationalizations of a desperate man. At the end of the letter, he wrote, I understand if you can't forgive me. I can't forgive myself. But I need you to know I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't know what else to do. I haven't written back. I don't know if I will. Dr. Patel says that's okay. Says I don't owe him anything, not even a response. But he's still my son. And that's the terrible truth I have to live with. I'm 64 years old. My liver is damaged but recovering. Dr. Okonkwo says I'll likely make a full recovery, or close enough. I've got maybe 20 more years if I'm lucky. I'm going to spend them carefully. Going to pay attention to the people in my life, to their struggles, to the warning signs I missed. And I'm going to tell this story to anyone who will listen, because if it can happen to me, a man who thought he knew his son, who thought he was careful, who thought his family was solid, then it can happen to anyone. Watch for the signs. Trust your instincts. Protect yourself, even from the people you love, especially from the people you love, because sometimes the person who's supposed to take care of you is the one who's trying to kill you, and you won't see it coming until it's almost too late. I see Nurse Patterson sometimes, at the grocery store or the pharmacy. We always stop and chat. She asks how I'm doing, really doing. Last time I saw her, She told me about another patient, elderly woman, similar symptoms. She's watching it closely now, asking questions. You taught me to be more vigilant, she said, to trust my gut. Maybe that's something. Maybe my story, my pain, will save someone else. That's what I tell myself anyway, on the hard days. It has to mean something. All of this has to mean something. Otherwise, it's just waste. Just a family destroyed for nothing. I'm writing this down because people need to know. This isn't a rare occurrence. It's not something that only happens in movies or true crime podcasts. It's real. It's happening. And it could be happening to you or someone you love right now. So please, pay attention. Ask questions. And if something feels wrong, don't ignore it. Don't wait for a nurse to slip you a note. By then, it might already be too late.